What if I told you that the timing of your last meal could be quietly reshaping your body while you sleep? Not dramatically, not overnight, but in small, compounding ways that show up on your waistline weeks before you notice them in the mirror. That idea sounds almost too convenient, too clean, too much like the kind of thing someone says right before they try to sell you something. But there is actual biology behind it, and once you understand it, the way you think about your evenings will never quite be the same. People have been cutting off food at night for years now. No food after 6, no eating after 7, close the kitchen at sunset. The rule has 100 different versions, but the hope behind all of them is the same. Stop feeding yourself at night, give your body a long, quiet window, and watch the fat around your belly slowly disappear. It sounds like a small trade. You give up late snacks, and your body gives up stored fat. Clean, simple, logical. Except the human body is almost never clean, simple, or logical. And belly fat, specifically the kind that builds up deep in your abdomen, is one of the most stubborn and complex things your biology produces. It is not just cosmetic. That deep visceral fat wrapped around your organs is metabolically active. It releases inflammatory signals, disrupts insulin function, raises your risk for heart disease, and makes it harder for your body to regulate blood sugar over time. People are not wrong to want it gone. They are just often wrong about what it actually takes to move it. So, the question sitting at the center of all of this is real and worth taking seriously. Does stopping food after 6 in the evening actually change what your body does with the fat stored around your waist? Is there something meaningful happening when you draw that line, or is it just a behavioral trick dressed up in the language of metabolism? To answer that honestly, you have to look at your internal clock, your hunger hormones, the way your cells respond to insulin at different hours, and the quiet but powerful relationship between when you stop eating and how well you sleep. Because once you connect all of those threads, the picture becomes much more interesting than either the enthusiasts or the skeptics usually admit. Your body does not treat 6 in the evening as just another hour. It has an internal timing system, a biological clock built into nearly every cell that coordinates your physiology across the full 24 hours of the day. This circadian rhythm does not just govern when you feel tired or alert. It also controls how your gut moves, how your fat cells respond to hormones, how efficiently your liver processes nutrients, and crucially, how well your body handles a meal depending on when that meal arrives.
In the morning and earlier in the day, insulin sensitivity tends to be higher. That means when you eat carbohydrates or fat, your cells are more responsive to insulin. They take up glucose more efficiently. Your blood sugar rises and falls more smoothly, and your body is generally better positioned to use that energy rather than store it. As the day progresses toward evening and night, that sensitivity gradually declines. The same meal that your body handled gracefully at noon becomes a heavier burden at 10 at night. Post-meal blood sugar rises higher and stays elevated longer. Energy expenditure after eating tends to be slightly lower, and the hormonal environment shifts quietly but measurably towards storage rather than burning. This is not a small detail tucked away in obscure research. Controlled studies comparing the metabolic response to identical meals eaten at different times of day consistently show that late meals hit harder. They produce more pronounced blood sugar spikes, they keep insulin elevated for longer, and in some protocols, they appear to slightly reduce how many calories the body burns processing that food. None of this means a late meal is poison, but it does mean that the timing of food is a real biological variable, not a myth invented by wellness culture. Now layer on top of that the way late eating can influence your appetite the next day. There is evidence suggesting that eating later in the evening can elevate hunger signals the following morning and afternoon, creating a pattern where you are not just eating late, you are eating more overall because the hormonal rhythm has been nudged slightly off course. Over months and years, that compounding effect has real consequences for body weight and for where your body tends to store the excess.
To really understand what stops eating after 6 can and cannot do, you need to understand the two central players in this story. The first is insulin. When you eat, your blood sugar rises and your pancreas releases insulin to manage it. Insulin is not a villain, it is essential. But when insulin is elevated, your body is in storage mode. The fat cells are locked, the liver is busy. The deep visceral fat around your abdomen is particularly sensitive to this, and chronically high insulin over many hours of the day, especially late into the night, makes it harder for your body to access that stored fat as fuel. The longer you can keep insulin low, particularly overnight, the more time your body has to shift into a fat-burning state rather than a fat-storing one. The second player is your circadian rhythm, and it does something fascinating. It does not just tell you when to feel sleepy, it actually prepares your fat cells, your liver, and your gut for the timing of meals. When you eat in sync with that rhythm, broadly speaking earlier in the active part of your day, your body processes food more fluidly. When you eat against it, pushing large meals or heavy snacks into the hours when your biology is winding down, you create a mismatch. That mismatch is not catastrophic for one late dinner, but when it becomes a nightly habit, it quietly stacks the metabolic odds against you. People who regularly eat most of their calories late in the day, or who graze from dinner all the way to bedtime, consistently show worse insulin sensitivity, higher body weight, and a greater tendency toward abdominal fat accumulation, even in studies where total calories are matched. That tells you something important. It is not only about how much you eat, it is also about when.
So when you commit to no food after 6, what you may actually be doing, beyond the obvious behavioral benefits, is shortening the daily window during which insulin stays elevated, giving your body more overnight hours in a lower insulin state, and shifting your calorie intake into the earlier part of the day when your metabolism handles it more efficiently. Some trials on early time-restricted eating, meaning eating windows that close earlier rather than later, have shown modest but real improvements in body fat, waist circumference, fasting glucose, and blood pressure, even without dramatic changes in total calories. That is not magic. That is biology working the way it was designed to work when you stop fighting it at night. Here is the honest truth that gets lost in most conversations about this topic. Stopping eating after 6 can genuinely help reduce belly fat for many people, but the most powerful mechanism is not mystical, it is mundane. It is simply that most people eat less when they have a firm cutoff time. The late-night snacks disappear, the second dessert never happens. The mindless handful of crackers in front of the television, the glass of wine that turns into 2, the just a small bowl of cereal at 10:30, all of it quietly vanishes when the kitchen is closed and the rule is clear. That reduction in total calories, accumulated night after night over weeks and months, is where a significant portion of the fat loss actually comes from.
But there is a second effect that is more interesting and less obvious. When you eat earlier and stop earlier, you are automatically shifting more of your food intake into the hours when your body handles it best. Several trials comparing early eating windows to late eating windows found that people who ate earlier lost more body fat and showed better metabolic markers, even when researchers tried to control for total calorie intake. That suggests meal timing carries its own independent weight in the fat loss equation, separate from simple calorie math. And yet here is the part that almost no one talks about when they post their 6 p.m. rule success story online. If you stop eating after 6 and then compensate by eating enormous meals between noon and 5, loading up on ultra-processed food, refined sugar, and saturated fat because you are trying to get everything in before the cutoff, the belly fat is largely unmoved. The rule is a frame. What you put inside that frame still matters enormously. Time-restricted eating in recent meta-analyses consistently shows up as helpful for modest fat loss and improved metabolic markers, but the effect sizes are not dramatically larger than other calorie-controlled approaches. The timing helps, It is not a replacement for the fundamentals.
One of the most underappreciated things that happens when you stop eating after 6 has nothing to do with insulin curves or circadian biology. It has to do with the specific kinds of foods that disappear from your life. For most people, the majority of their worst eating happens at night. The highly processed snacks, the sugary drinks, the alcohol, the salty chips, the ice cream eaten standing over the freezer. These things do not usually happen at 8 in the morning. They happen in the hours after dinner, when you are tired, your willpower is depleted, and your brain is looking for a reward after a long day. When those hours are no longer eating hours, that entire category of food choices simply stops appearing in your diet. You are not fighting those cravings with discipline and white-knuckling it every night. The rule removes the decision entirely. That behavioral simplicity, the fact that you no longer have to negotiate with yourself about whether you deserve a snack at 9:30, is one of the most quietly powerful things about having a firm food cutoff. Over time, the downstream effects are significant. Less excess energy, fewer blood sugar spikes late at night, less disruption to your hunger hormones the following day, and a gradually improving relationship between your appetite and your actual needs.
There's also a behavioral ripple effect that is easy to underestimate. When you know your eating window ends at 6, you are more motivated to eat a proper, satisfying meal before that cutoff, rather than skipping dinner, telling yourself you will grab something later, and then overeating at 9 because you are genuinely hungry and exhausted. The structure of the rule tends to pull your habits into better shape, even in the hours before the cutoff, not just during them. Now, none of this comes without caveats, and the caveats matter. For some people and in some circumstances, a hard stop at 6 p.m. can actually work against fat loss rather than supporting it. If you train in the late afternoon or evening, for example, cutting off food before you have had a chance to eat something after your workout can leave your muscles under-recovered, your glycogen stores depleted, and your sleep more disrupted than it would have been with a small post-workout meal. Chronic under-recovery from exercise quietly erodes your muscle mass over time, and less muscle means a slower resting metabolism, which works directly against belly fat loss in the long run.
There is also the risk of what might be called compensatory crowding. Some people respond to a strict evening cutoff by barely eating during the day, not because they are intentionally restricting, but because they are busy or distracted, and then slamming a massive amount of food into the 2 hours before 6 because their body finally has time and space to feel hungry. Eating very large amounts of food very quickly in a narrow window creates its own problems: digestive discomfort, significant blood sugar swings, and a pattern of eating that is driven by the clock rather than hunger signals, which over time can actually deepen a dysfunctional relationship with food rather than healing it. And for specific populations, changing meal timing without professional guidance can carry real risks. People with diabetes who use insulin or other glucose-lowering medications need careful oversight when altering eating patterns, because the interaction between medication timing, meal timing, and blood sugar is complex and individual. Pregnant women have nutritional needs that do not pause after 6. Teenagers and growth spurts require consistent fuel across the day. And anyone with a history of disordered eating should approach any rule-based eating framework with caution and ideally with support, because rigid cutoffs can sometimes reactivate patterns of restriction and overcompensation that are genuinely harmful. The goal, always, is not obedience to a clock. The goal is a relationship with food and timing that supports your health, your energy, your body composition, and your long-term well-being, all at the same time.
There is a widespread belief that everything you eat at night turns directly into belly fat, as though your digestive system has a switch that flips at sundown and converts every calorie into stored abdominal fat. That is an exaggeration, but it is not pure fiction either. The core principle of energy balance still holds. If you eat more than you burn over time, you will gain weight. If you eat less, you will lose it. There is no metabolic portal after 6 p.m. where calories are automatically redirected to your waistline. What changes in the evening is the context surrounding the calories, not the calories themselves. Late eating is almost always accompanied by other factors that work against fat loss: disrupted sleep, alcohol, highly processed foods chosen for comfort rather than nutrition, reduced physical activity, elevated stress hormones from a long day, and a brain that is genuinely less capable of making thoughtful food decisions when it is tired. Take all of those factors together, and late eating becomes part of a pattern that is reliably associated with more belly fat, worse metabolic health, and higher body weight, even in studies that try to hold total calories constant. That is why shifting the center of gravity of your eating earlier in the day tends to improve things beyond what simple calorie reduction would predict. You are not just eating less, you are eating at a time when your biology is better equipped to handle it, in a mental and behavioral context that supports better choices, with fewer competing factors pulling your habits in the wrong direction. Perhaps the most underrated dimension of this entire topic is what stopping early does for your sleep, and what better sleep then does for your belly fat. When you eat a heavy meal close to bedtime, your digestive system is working hard during the hours when your body is trying to wind down. That can mean more reflux, more discomfort, lighter and more fragmented sleep, and less time in the deep restorative stages that your body actually needs to recover. Over time, chronically poor sleep does something very specific to your hormones. It raises ghrelin, the hormone that drives hunger, and lowers leptin, the hormone that signals fullness. The result is that you wake up hungrier, stay hungry more of the day, and find it harder to stop eating even when you have consumed enough calories. That hormonal drift accumulates quietly and shows up, eventually, as more fat around your middle. By stopping eating earlier, many people naturally build a longer buffer between their last bite and bedtime. Digestion progresses further before sleep, reflux risk drops, sleep quality improves, and better sleep begins to slowly correct the hormonal imbalance that was making hunger harder to control. None of this is fast. None of it is dramatic in any single night. But compounded across weeks and months, the difference between someone who sleeps well and someone who does not is written clearly in their waistline, their energy, and their relationship with food.
Add small pauses between key ideas. There's also a simpler, more immediate effect worth mentioning. Late heavy meals and salty processed snacks cause water retention and bloating that can make your midsection look and feel significantly larger the next morning, entirely independent of actual fat mass. When you stop eating early and choose lighter, less sodium-dense food in your last meal of the day, a portion of what improves fairly quickly is simply less of that chronic inflammation and distension. The fat is still there and still takes time to shift, but the baseline of how you look and feel day to day improves in a way that is genuinely motivating. A practical concern that comes up constantly is social life. What about dinner with friends, family birthdays, late work events, date nights, or the simple pleasure of a slow evening meal? The answer is that you do not need rigid perfection for this approach to work. You need consistency more than you need purity. 4 or 5 days of earlier eating is enough to move the needle meaningfully if the other days do not spiral into all-night eating marathons. You can adjust the cutoff to fit your actual life. Perhaps 7 makes more sense than 6 given your schedule. Perhaps your last meal can be at 6:30 as long as it is balanced and not enormous. Perhaps on the nights when life requires a later dinner, you simply keep the meal lighter and skip the late snacking rather than treating the whole day as lost.
Add small pauses between key ideas. What can you realistically expect if you make this change and hold it consistently for 6 to 12 weeks? For most people, the first things to improve are not visible. Sleep gets a little better. Mornings feel a little lighter. The chronic low-level bloating that you had stopped noticing eases. Hunger becomes more predictable.
cravings in the evening weaken because you are no longer feeding them every night and keeping them strong. Those changes matter. And they matter because they make every other healthy habit easier to maintain. On the physical side, if the earlier cutoff genuinely helps you reduce total calories, improve food quality, and sleep better, you will likely see gradual reductions in body weight and waist circumference over those weeks. The pace will be slow, and that is exactly right. The visceral fat deep in your abdomen, the fat that matters most for your health, responds to sustained lifestyle changes over time, not to any single trick applied for a few days. But it does respond. And the combination of earlier meals, a longer overnight fasting window, better sleep quality, and fewer late-night processed food choices creates the kind of environment where that response becomes more likely.
Add small pauses between key ideas. The 6 p.m. rule, at its best, is a simple structure that makes good choices easier and bad ones less likely. It is not a magic spell. It does not override calorie balance. It does not work in isolation from food quality, movement, stress, and sleep. But as one piece of a genuinely healthy pattern, it is a more powerful tool than most people realize, and far more grounded in real biology than the skeptics tend to admit. Use it that way, and your belly will likely notice the difference before you can fully see it.